In the spring of 1846, a successful farmer named George Donner stood in Independence, Missouri, looking at two routes west to California. The traditional route, the California Trail, was proven 2,000 miles. Well-traveled, known watering holes, established camps, slow but safe. Then there was the other option. A man named Lansford Hastings had published a guidebook called The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. In it, he described a shortcut, the Hastings Cutoff, that would save 400 miles and weeks of travel time. The book was convincing, detailed, confident. There was just one problem. Lansford Hastings had never actually traveled the route he was recommending. George Donner and his brother Jacob had to choose: take the long way that thousands had survived, or trust the shortcut that promised to get them to California before winter. They chose the shortcut. This is the story of that choice, not the sensational version with scattered details and melodrama. This is the real story, the slow accumulation of small decisions, the mathematical reality of mountain snow, and what happens when a group of ordinary families makes one wrong turn. By the time it was over, 87 people would be trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains for 5 months. Only 48 would survive, and the shortcut that promised to save them weeks. It added 125 miles to their journey and cost them an extra month of travel time. That month made all the difference. The Donner Party wasn't actually one party at all. It was multiple families traveling together for safety, each with their own wagons, their own supplies, their own reasons for going west. George Donner, age 60, was a prosperous Illinois farmer. He traveled with his wife Tamsin, a former school teacher, and their 5 daughters. His brother Jacob brought his family as well. The Donners had money. They brought 3 wagons loaded with supplies and even a substantial amount of cash hidden in the wagon bed. James Reed was even wealthier. He built a massive 2-story wagon called the Pioneer Palace Car, complete with a built-in stove, cushioned seats, and sleeping bunks. It was the largest wagon anyone had seen. His wife Margaret was in poor health. Reed wanted her to travel in comfort. Then there were the Breens, Patrick and Margaret with their 7 children, ranging from infant to teenager. They were Irish immigrants, Catholic, modest in means but well supplied. The Graves family, the Murphys, the Eddies, the Kessebergs. About 30 families in all, plus teamsters, hired hands, and a few individuals traveling alone. Most were in their 30s and 40s. Many had children, dozens of children, some as young as infants. These weren't reckless adventurers. They were farmers, merchants, family men and women looking for a fresh start in California's Sacramento Valley. They left Independence in May 1846, joining the main wagon train heading west. For the first few months, everything went according to plan. The trail was well marked, water was available, game was plentiful, the weather was good. Then, in late July, they reached a place called Fort Bridger in what's now Wyoming. This was the decision point, the fork in the road. Fort Bridger was hardly a fort at all, just 2 log cabins and a corral, a lonely trading post in the middle of nowhere, run by mountain man Jim Bridger and his partner Louis Vasquez. But it was civilization of a sort. A place to rest the oxen, a place to repair wagons, a place to make decisions. James Kleiman, an experienced mountain man, met them at the fort. He'd just come from California, traveling east on the Hastings Cutoff that Donner was planning to take West Kleiman and Reed were old friends from Illinois. They sat up late talking, their conversations stretching into the night hours. "Take the regular wagon track," Kleiman warned him. "Never take no cutoffs and hurry along as fast as you can." Kleiman knew. He'd seen the route. The salt flats that went on for days with no water. The mountains where wagons had to be hauled up by rope. The thick brush that required cutting a road by hand. He'd barely made it through on horseback. Wagons would be another matter entirely. But Reed had Hastings's guidebook. It promised. It explained. It described a better way. And Bridger himself had vouched for the route, told Reed it was fine, level road with plenty of water and grass. Of course, Bridger had a financial interest in sending emigrants that direction. The more wagons that took Hastings's route, the more business for his trading post. What Reed didn't know was that Edwin Bryant, another friend from Illinois, had also left a letter warning him away from the cutoff. Vasquez had kept that letter in his pocket. It was never delivered. The Donner Party chose to follow Hastings's directions. On July 31, 1846, they left Fort Bridger and headed southwest into unmapped territory. They were now on their own. The first sign of trouble came quickly. The route required them to cut their own road through the Wasatch Mountains. Trees had to be felled, brush had to be cleared, boulders had to be moved. It took them 16 days to travel 36 miles. At that pace, they were barely moving at all. By the time they emerged from the Wasatch, they'd already lost 2 weeks compared to the main trail. Then came the Salt Flats. Hastings's guidebook had described this section as a drive of 2 days. The reality was 80 miles of white, scorching desert with no water, no grass, no shade. The oxen began to collapse. Wagons had to be abandoned. Families cached supplies in the desert, planning to retrieve them later, knowing they never would. The crossing took 6 days and 5 nights. By the end, they'd lost dozens of oxen, several wagons, and most of their reserve supplies. People walked through the night, children crying from thirst, the salt crust crunching beneath boots and hooves. James Reed's massive Pioneer Palace wagon, the symbol of his wealth and foresight, had to be abandoned. They transferred what they could to smaller wagons and left the rest behind in the white desert. The shortcut that was supposed to save them 400 miles? By the time they rejoined the California Trail in early September, they'd added 125 miles to their journey. More importantly, they'd lost nearly a month. In early October, as they approached the Sierra Nevada, an elderly man named Hardcoop could no longer walk. He asked to ride in one of the wagons. The Keseberg family, who had been letting him ride, refused. Hardcoop begged, he pleaded. They left him by the trail. William Eddy, one of the teamsters, went back to look for him the next day. He found tracks leading off the trail into the darkness. Hardcoop was never seen again. The mood of the party had changed. The friendliness of the early months had evaporated. Families looked after their own. Resources were hoarded. Arguments erupted over trivial matters. On October 5th, tensions boiled over. A teamster named John Snyder got into an argument with one of Reed's hired men over whose oxen should lead through a difficult section. Snyder began beating the driver with his whip handle. When Reed intervened, Snyder struck him in the head, opening a gash. Reed pulled a knife and stabbed Snyder in the chest. Snyder died minutes later. The group held a hasty trial. Some wanted to hang Reed immediately. Others argued for banishment. Ultimately, they decided to exile him from the party, sending him ahead on horseback with no supplies except what his family could secretly slip him. James Reed rode west alone into the gathering autumn, leaving his wife and 4 children to continue with the wagon train. By late October, they reached the base of the Sierra Nevada mountains. They were exhausted, depleted, and late. On October 31st, more than a month later than most wagon trains crossed, they began their ascent into the mountains. The pass was about 40 miles ahead. 40 miles to cross the summit, then it was downhill into California's Central Valley. On November 3rd, the first snow began to fall. By November 5th, it was a blizzard. The snow accumulated faster than anyone expected. 3 feet, 5 feet, 7 feet. The pass ahead was completely blocked. They tried to push forward. The snow was chest deep on the oxen. The wagons couldn't move. They turned back to a lake they'd passed, later named Donner Lake, and made camp. It was supposed to be temporary. They'd wait out the storm and cross when the weather cleared. The storm didn't clear. More snow fell, then more. By mid-November, the snow was 12 feet deep in places. The pass was impossible. They were trapped. The families quickly built crude cabins near the lake. Some used existing structures left by previous travelers. rough log walls with hide roofs. Others built shelters from scratch. The Donner family, several miles back, built their camp at Alder Creek. The cabins were primitive. Dirt floors, no windows, gaps in the walls stuffed with rags and blankets. The roofs leaked. When it snowed, they had to clear the snow from inside the shelters. The cold seeped through everything. They had some food, dried meat, flour, a few cattle still alive. They rationed carefully. Surely the snow would stop soon. Surely they could cross in a week or two. But the snow kept falling and falling and falling. The Sierra Nevada was living up to its name, the Snowy Range. Storm after storm rolled in from the Pacific. The snow accumulated in layers, each storm adding another foot, another 2 feet. The temperature dropped. The wind howled through the mountain passes. The world became white and silent and endless. Patrick Breen began keeping a diary. His entries chart the slow realization that they were in serious trouble. November 20th. Came to this place on the 31st of last month. That it snowed. We went onto the pass. The snow so deep we were unable to find the road when within 3 miles of the summit. November 21st. Fine morning. Killed my last oxen today. November 25th. Cloudy. Looks like snow. Killed one of Murphy's oxen today. The days blurred together. Wake in the freezing cabin. Melt snow for water. Ration the diminishing food. Watch the children grow thinner. Sleep. Repeat. By December, the cattle were gone. They began boiling the hides to extract any nutrition. The leather was softened in water, then scraped clean and boiled into a gelatinous substance that provided minimal sustenance. They ate the family dogs. They boiled bones multiple times to extract every possible calorie. December 16th. 15 of the party attempted to cross the mountains on snowshoes. This group became known as the Forlorn Hope. 15 people, 10 men, 5 women, strapped crude snowshoes to their feet and attempted to walk out over the summit to Sutter's Fort in California's Central Valley, about 100 miles away. The snowshoes were makeshift affairs, fashioned from oxbows and rawhide strips. Most of the group had never used snowshoes before. They had no experience with winter mountain travel, but they were out of options. They had minimal food, a few days' rations. They believed they could make it in 6 or 7 days. Keep moving, don't stop. Get to California, send back help. It took them 33 days. The first week went reasonably well. They made progress. The weather cooperated. Then a blizzard hit. They lost their way. Their fire went out in the storm. They huddled together under blankets covered in snow, waiting for death or mourning, whichever came first. Of the 15 who left, only 7 survived. Those 7 only lived because after 12 days without food, they began eating those who had died. Back at the lake, the families didn't know if the Forlorn Hope had made it. They waited. The snow kept falling. Breen's diary entries became grimmer. December 25th, Christmas, began to snow yesterday. Snowed all night and continues this morning. January 1st, 1847. We live on very small allowance of hides, 1/2 of a hide per day. January 4th. Fine morning, looks like spring. Mrs. Reed and Virginia, Milton, and Eliza started for the summit about noon. Comeback could not get over. They were too weak now to even attempt the crossing. Children lay in bunks, conserving energy. Adults moved slowly, deliberately, trying not to burn precious calories. January 10th. Began to snow last night, still continues today. January 13th. Snowing fast. January 17th. Eliza came here this morning, says Landrum. Murphy died last night. The deaths had begun. On January 18th, one of the Forlorn Hope survivors staggered into Johnson's Ranch in the Sacramento Valley. She told her story. 7 people followed her in over the next week. A rescue party was quickly organized. But organizing meant gathering supplies, recruiting men willing to risk their lives and preparing for a mountain crossing in midwinter. It took time. The first relief didn't reach the lake camps until February 18th, more than 3 months after the families had been trapped by then. 13 people were dead. When the rescuers arrived, they found scenes they would never forget. Emaciated figures emerging from dark cabins, children with hollow eyes and skeletal limbs, adults too weak to stand. The smell of death and unwashed bodies and desperation. The rescuers brought food, not much, because they had to carry it on their backs through deep snow, but enough they fed the survivors carefully. Too much food too quickly would kill someone whose body had been starving for months. Small portions, warm soup, gentle nourishment. They could only take out those strong enough to walk. 23 people left with the first relief. The rest, too weak, too young, were choosing to stay with family members, remained behind. Among those who stayed was Tamsin Donner. Her husband, George, was dying from an infected hand wound. She could have left with her children. The rescuers begged her to come. She refused 3 times. "I will not leave him," she said. The second relief arrived in early March. More survivors were brought out, but the snow was still deep and more people remained at the camps. The third relief arrived on March 14th. 4 men. They found conditions that were beyond comprehension. The survivors had been trapped for over 4 months now. Some had resorted to eating those who had died, not killing, but consuming the dead to survive. The rescuers didn't judge. They understood. These people had done what they had to do to keep breathing. The fourth and final relief party arrived in mid-April. The snow was finally melting. They found only 1 person still alive at the camps, Louis Caseberg, who had been too injured to travel with earlier rescues. Tamsin Donner's body was never found. When the accounting was complete, the numbers were stark. 87 people had been trapped in the mountains, 48 survived, 40 died. But the statistics reveal something surprising. Of the 34 females in the party, 24 survived, a 71% survival rate. Of the 53 males, only 23 survived, a 43% survival rate. Of the children under age 5, most of the girls survived while most of the boys died. Scientists have studied this for decades. The theories: women carry more body fat, which provides insulation and reserves. Prepubescent girls may have metabolic advantages. Males, especially teenage males, have higher caloric needs and less fat reserves. But there's another factor: the social dynamics. Women prioritized feeding children. Men gave their rations to their families. Some men took greater risks, hunting, attempting to walk out for help, and died in the attempt. The Breen family, all 9 members, survived intact. Patrick credited their survival to careful rationing, staying together, and faith. His diary entries regularly note times of prayer. James Reed, who had been banished and rode ahead alone, made it to California and was instrumental in organizing the relief parties. He returned to help rescue his own family. His wife, Margaret, and all 4 children survived. The Donner brothers both died. George Donner died at Alder Creek in late March. Jacob died earlier. But of their combined children, most survived. The lessons from Donner Pass were learned slowly, but they were learned. The Hastings Cutoff was immediately abandoned. No one ever took that route again. Lansford Hastings himself never returned to defend his guidebook. He moved to California, practiced law, and died in 1870 without ever publicly acknowledging the disaster his advice had caused. The traditional route, the slow, proven, well-traveled route, became the standard. Shortcuts were viewed with deep suspicion. The phrase, "Remember the Donner Party," became a warning against taking unnecessary risks when lives hung in the balance. But perhaps the most important lesson was about timing. If the Donner Party had reached the Sierra Nevada even 2 weeks earlier, they would have crossed easily. The pass was open until early November. 2 weeks, that's all it would have taken. Those 2 weeks were lost in the Wasatch Mountains, cutting a road through timber. They were lost in the salt desert, recovering from collapsed oxen and abandoned wagons. They were lost because a man wrote a guidebook about a route he'd never traveled, and desperate families believed him. The survivors carried their stories for the rest of their lives. Some talked openly about their experiences, others refused to ever discuss it. A few were falsely accused of murder and cannibalism, accusations that haunted them for decades. Children who had been infants during the ordeal grew up and had children of their own. They told the story, or didn't tell it, depending on how they chose to remember. Some wanted to forget, others felt a duty to bear witness, but they had survived through choices they never thought they'd have to make, through winter storms that tested the limits of human endurance, through the simple act of waking up each morning and choosing to live one more day. They survived. Today, Interstate 80 crosses the Sierra Nevada near the same location. The pass is named Donner Pass. The lake is Donner Lake. In winter, the highway closes sometimes during heavy snow. Modern travelers wait in warm cars with full gas tanks and phone service, frustrated by the delay. The snow still falls there. 12 feet in a season is common, 20 feet is not unusual. The cabins are gone. The graves were mostly lost when the railroad was built through the area in the 1860s, but the trees remain, the mountains remain. The snow still falls each winter, just as it did in 1846.